Hi, it's Arjun. We hope everyone enjoyed a great July 4th break. We had a nice week off in Scotland celebrating our son's college graduation. This week we want to start to flesh out one of the key themes we highlighted in our last video just before our break, which we are calling some of the above depending on country and region. And we think of that as sort of a better macro and energy policy framing for energy. It's undoubtedly going to get shortened to simply some of the above. And it is meant to reflect the idea that energy sources and technologies that make sense for some countries may not make sense for others. And both countries and citizens are going to go with what makes sense in their area and for their country. I think by now most people know SuperSpike was created as essentially a protest to what had been a very narrow definition of kind of, quote, the energy transition, the kind of, to me, absurd idea that we were going to get out of fossil fuels, go only into renewables over some arbitrarily short time frame. None of that, I think you all know, we thought ever made sense, and it is being relegated to the dustbin of history. We have replaced it with terms like energy pragmatism and all of the above. And I think as we have spent more time discussing and thinking about this, those terms as well are somewhat imprecise and ill-defined. Pragmatism especially can mean many things to many different people, and it doesn't actually articulate a specific positive view of how we should think about energy policy, macro, and the outlooks and so forth, and has a little bit of an anything goes mindset, which I don't think is, frankly, any more correct than was the old, very narrow, the energy transition. So practically speaking, countries and citizens are going to make choices, and they're going to choose some of the above depending on country and region. So I want to start with a quick recap of how energy policies evolved really over the last 4 or 5 years. And of course, we were in this the energy transition and net zero type world. And I'll say this about it. While political pendulums will swing from right to left, especially in the United States, but to some degree other parts of the world, I don't think we're ever going back to net zero as a defining objective, or that idea that the world is going to prioritize counting carbon. We can have a debate on the degree to which that is an important or less important policy goal, but the idea that it's anyone's number one goal, we see no evidence of that anywhere. And so I don't think we're going back to that net zero world. Our framing has been that everyone deserves to be energy rich and that their choices are going to be based on a hierarchy of needs. There is overwhelming evidence that all anyone cares about across all of Earth, all 8 billion people, is, do I have energy today, 24/7, 365? And of course, the lucky 1 billion of us, those in the rich, mostly Western world, get to take that for granted. And the other 7 billion people on Earth, without doubt, are aspiring to those same types of living standards. You will care about availability before you care about affordability, but ideally, you'd like energy to be both available and affordable. Citizens tend to not care as much about geopolitical security, but at the country level, at the political leader level, geopolitical security tends to be that sort of second priority after ensuring energy is available, reliable, and hopefully affordable. And then finally, I think our comment on the environmental considerations are, there's little doubt to me that clean air and clean water are 100% positively correlated with being economically and energy rich. And then there is the question of how do you take into account biodiversity and perhaps as well carbon emissions. The issue with the all of the above energy pragmatism that we ourselves have touted is that they're somewhat ill-defined and they leave a lot of room for interpretation. And maybe the example would be, if someone like myself thinks ESG went off the rails over the last 3 years and went to a place it should never have gone, the answer to that is not, to me, anti-ESG. It's not just about being against whatever you previously thought didn't make sense. I think that is what we're trying to involve here. So we have used the term energy, and we are pragmatists, right? We are not ideologues. We are absolutely pragmatists. Make a compelling argument. Show me the economics. Show me how it ties to humanity's natural hierarchy of needs, and we will absolutely support it. But pragmatism itself is not a specific policy choice, and that's what we're trying to get at today. The world needs open, healthy debate and discussion, and that was one of the big problems with the prior 4 years. And I'm gonna pull up so I don't misquote it. And I'm gonna veer a little bit from my preference. I do not want to engage in culture war arguments at super spiked. But there was a New York Times article that just came out a couple of days ago saying Trump hires scientists who doubt the consensus on climate change, and it specifically references Dr. Steve Koonin. Now, Steve Koonin has been a former colleague of mine. I consider him a friend. He's been on Veritan's Close of Business Tuesday. He's someone I respect and admire. To de facto label him as sort of a climate denier that's going against the overwhelming consensus, this is a big part of the problem with what the last 4 years was. People don't believe it, right? No one's acting like that overwhelming consensus is how the world wants to act. And so these kind of articles are completely unhelpful. And I think this idea that you can't discuss severity of weather versus climate impacts and so forth is absolute nonsense. People are choosing to move to Florida, where there are lots of hurricanes. People are choosing to move to Texas. People are choosing to move to places like Pacific Palisades, where there's lots of fires. So yes, they're more in the way of severe weather. And yes, when there's more economic activity, the dollar damages are larger. We need to have open, healthy dialogue and debate. That is the notion of how Veritan was founded, truth and energy. Let's discuss and have open dialogue. And I always accept and welcome pushback and feedback. And I think that should apply to all topics. I think the final area is a question that I do get asked, especially from those of you that are most passionate about climate. And my friend and colleague at the Center on Global Energy Policy, Jason Bordoff, asked me this on a podcast that I would encourage people to listen to. It got published just before the July 4th break. And the question was, what would you say would make, I'm paraphrasing here, good low carbon energy policies? Should we have explicit policies? How do you think about it? How would you address those that are especially passionate about the climate? And I'm not sure we have an answer, to be honest with you. I don't think I really had an answer on this podcast. I don't know that I have an answer today. My comment is typically, when you look at how substantial the energy needs are of the rest of the world, and especially places like China, India, and Southeast Asia, you look at the fact that they tend to be pretty short crude oil, meaning they don't have a lot of it. It has certainly been the motivation for China to suddenly become dominant in the new energies value chain. And I think it's going to be a big part of how India thinks about its future. How can India ensure that it does not become dependent on large and massive crude oil imports? As sort of the example of how I think you will end up with a greater percentage of low carbon energy. It takes time. There's uncertainty on the technology S-curves in terms of ramping up economically. That type of answer is often unsatisfying to many of you who are most passionate about climate, saying there needs to be an explicit sort of, here's how emissions roll forward. I just don't believe that's how the world acts. I see little evidence that anyone prioritizes anything other than energy availability 24/7, 365, and it will be through that geopolitical angle that I think you will de facto have both increasing usage of low carbon technologies, but inevitably the kind of breakthroughs that can crack the code on maybe a different energy future than what we've had in the past. So let me just go through some underlying principles for what we mean by some of the above. And we've said this now, the vast bulk of countries are going to prioritize economic health and geopolitical security. And I say vast bulk because it's not true everywhere. When you look at places like California, Western Europe, and even Canada over the last decade or so, they've prioritized counting carbon and they've prioritized energy transition. Now, at least in Europe's case, you can make the argument that there is a geopolitical angle to that as well, to the extent Europe doesn't have that much crude oil relative to the size of their energy needs. So there's some argument in Europe, the sort of climate-y net zero type objectives do match up with geopolitical security, but I'm going to dispute that that's the case in either Canada or California. I think the question is, will there be enough political change, enough of a pushback from their citizens to really get back on track with prioritizing economic health and economic growth, which comes from using the types of resources they're blessed with. There's a lot of oil and gas in Canada. There's a lot of oil, certainly, or at least more oil than they're going after in places like California. We shall see. I've said this, consumers and businesses prioritize reliability and affordability. They don't really care about geopolitical security for the most part. You just want to make sure your energy is reliable and affordable. It is at the country level that geopolitics come into play, and it is relevant. The ability to export energy, either sources or technologies, is a core geopolitical strength. The classic example is Saudi Arabia over most of the last, what are we talking, 80, 90 years now in terms of their geopolitical leverage and source of importance comes from their crude exports. Certainly, the United States has transformed itself from being highly dependent on de facto Middle East oil imports to now at least being balanced or a slight net oil exporter. It's transformed our geopolitical interests around the world. And you have a country like China that we'll get to in a few moments that went from being very oil import dependent, and they still are, to using that as a motivating factor to now be getting into the export business via solar panels, electric vehicles, as an example. That ability to export energy, either sources or technologies, a huge source because it matters to everything. Any economic activity is ultimately energy transformed. And therefore, if you can export energy, sources, or technology, it is a huge component of geopolitical strength. I've said this, clean air, clean water, 100% correlated with being economically wealthy. The final point, there's almost no one amongst the 8 billion people on Earth that would say, I care most about lowering carbon emissions over the other energy objectives, reliability, affordability, even geopolitical security. I see no evidence that anyone anywhere prioritizes that. The number of exceptions are really, really small. So just a few other considerations, and I want to get into a few country examples. No one technology or a handful of technologies is the answer. Again, it was part of my problem with the previous 4 years. Renewables are not the answer everywhere. I think in a place like India, solar and batteries are going to be a huge part of their mix. It's hard to see how solar makes sense in large swaths of Northern Europe, as an example. By the same token, while we are very supportive of increasing oil and gas investment in the United States and Canada, I don't think it's only about those legacy energy sources. It is about thinking more holistically, including a whole bunch of newer stuff. All of the above doesn't actually make sense in most areas. There's usually going to be 2, 3, 4, some subset of technologies that you may use everything, but you're going to be overly dependent or driven by probably a handful of technologies. So while it can sound like a pleasing term, all of the above, I'm not sure you could pick a place where it makes sense anywhere that you would actually do all of the above. You're going to do some of the above depending on where you are. It's the whole point of this video. Diversification of energy sources is a little bit of a correlate to the first point. It is a staple of healthier economies. Even if you are very abundant in, say, oil and gas, there are natural benefits for a variety of reasons, for things you can't control, or it could be weather, it could be economic reasons, it could be changing cost curves, to try your best to have a diversified mix of energy sources and technology. There is a strength from a country perspective of being diversified and not reliant on just a small number of energy technologies. And I think the final point I'd make, and it's come up in the US recently over some of the debates over the fate of the IRA, which is, I will say that taxes and incentives should lean into a country's source of competitive advantage. So what are your areas of competitive advantage, and how do you promote those areas? An example, thank goodness we have US shale oil and gas in the United States. How do we ensure our tax incentives promote the continuation in those areas and some related areas? China, they're not blessed with a lot of oil. They used their version of tax incentives to really build out a new energies value chain. Good for them. They probably could have tried to promote more oil development, but it's had its limitations. At the end of the day, they lean into areas of strength. And I think, I don't know why that would be controversial. I don't know why it doesn't make sense to me, it's very logical. You lean into areas of strength. Maybe I should say that and leave it at that. So I want to go through 3 country examples, China, the United States, and India, on some of these points. I think so, like, what is the priority for China? It is still moving from what historically was a poor country to now a middle income country to eventually becoming a rich country. It's a classic sort of economic development, moving up economic and energy S curves. And as a big part of that, and especially given the size of China, how do they think about geopolitical security? So smaller countries that historically went up that economic and energy S-curve, places like Japan and South Korea, they weren't necessarily in a position to create some new energy technology and dominate it. They went the diversification route. In the case of China, they said, listen, we're just going to try and create our own industry here. And that's solar panels, EVs, and these kind of things. And they frankly have done a great job of it. Their strengths are coal and the new energies value chain. I think there's a lot of talk about what's going on with them with solar panels, EVs, wherever you are on that point. But make no mistake, they have massively grown coal. They are, what, I think now slightly more than half of global coal consumption. It's why coal demand and production has not peaked and shows no signs of peaking. And it has been a core part. Coal has been a core part, perhaps the most important driver of China's massive miracle economically since the early 2000s. They go together. The coal in part enables the new energies value chain. And while going forward, it's logical for them to increase the percentage of new energies as part of their grid. I don't think anyone should underappreciate how important coal will remain to China going forward, even if on the margin, its growth rate slows, flattens, and perhaps even in individual years declines. It is still a really important source of underlying strength, especially since renewables are inherently intermittent. A weakness for China, their big weakness is oil import dependence. They've gone from 1.5 barrels of oil consumption per person to about 4. The rich world is anywhere from 10 to 20. And of course, if you took China from 4 barrels per person of oil consumption to that 10 to 20 range, you're talking an overwhelming amount of oil imports. And China said, we do not want to do that. It's the driver of their new energies expansion and dominance. And frankly, they are showing signs of being successful on certainly not being able to offset future oil import dependence than what would otherwise have been the case. From an energy export standpoint, they're going to be exporting EVs. Whether they come to the US or not, it doesn't seem like that's on track to happen. Not so sure about Europe, but they are going to be increasing electric vehicle exports, certainly to the rest of Southeast Asia. That seems to be on track. And I think as we think about things like oil demand forecasts, we do try and reflect the likelihood that inexpensive and frankly, interesting. It'd be interesting to look at a Xiaomi or BYD car. Wouldn't mind the opportunity to take a drive in one of these things. They are interesting vehicles, and they're going to expand market share in Southeast Asia. And of course, everyone knows China's dominance in solar panels. These are important sources of geopolitical strength for China. They are providing the energy sources and technologies that non-Chinese consumers and businesses are going to want. I think just a final point, as their core economic driver, China has become the factory of the world. But make no mistake, it was driven by coal. Inexpensive domestic coal has been the driver of making China the factory of the world and has been their core economic model. We can debate the future outlook of that, given trade concerns and tensions and all of those kind of things. But their driver has been, as a country, we're going to be factory of the world. It's how we're going to get lifted out of poverty and become a rich country. And that has been driven by coal. If I turn to the United States, I think our priority as a country has been to remain a superpower. Maybe the world's, I think, only superpower. We are going to be a superpower. And we also, I think, are looking to and want to and are on track to dominate in artificial intelligence and technology more broadly. Perhaps the core and most important non-energy thing to be thinking about going forward, AI and tech. I think we're in a great position in the US. And frankly, all of our economic and energy policies, I think, are going to be around these fronts. Our strengths are we are abundant, and we increasingly have an abundance agenda in all things energy. That's been oil via the shale revolution, nat gas via the shale revolution. We are abundant in coal. I think we can have separate debates. It deserves its own video podcast on how to think about the role our coal could go towards meeting international demand. If international coal demand is going to grow, it's not obvious to me why the US shouldn't be feeding into that via its domestic producers. And we can certainly have a debate on, do we need to unretire coal plants to ensure grid reliability? I'm going to save that for a separate conversation. We were leaders in nuclear. We've let that lead slip. There's no reason we can't get it back. And I think we're trying to take steps. I think it's bipartisan to get going there again. And then lastly, but not leastly, Silicon Valley huge source of strength. We have the world's leading technology companies and people. And then we have the world's dominant capital markets. And all these things, energy plus tech plus capital markets, are really a core feature of why I think the United States either is or can be very well positioned going forward. Our weakness is actually the new energies value chain. Now, some will say, well, that's why we needed to not kill the IRA. IRA probably needs to be its own video. I don't really honestly feel like talking about it. I think it was sort of overhyped by both sides when it was originally passed, and now as it's kind of sort of been repealed or at least gutted. I personally don't believe it was going to lead to the kind of new energies technologies growth the proponents touted, nor do I think it was the source of evil that those that were against it believed. Taken as an example, if you're going to do new energies, you need copper. How long does that copper project in Arizona, in what decade are we in trying to improve a single copper project in Arizona? And I'm not an expert on it. There may be reasons why it hasn't been approved or shouldn't be approved. I have no idea, right? But whether it's rare earths, value chain, other critical minerals, basic metals that you need, and all the refining of those things, were we really on track to do any of this stuff in the US? Doesn't mean we shouldn't care about new technologies. I care greatly about it. That's where Silicon Valley comes in. I think we absolutely should be trying to crack the code on the types of technologies the rest of the world is for sure going to want to use at the same time that we have an abundance agenda related to producing more oil and natural gas from our country. But it is a source of weakness for us, that new energies value chain. So the idea that we want to shift our demand to be dependent on the area of Chinese strength, that to me has never made sense. Even as, again, I believe we should care about new technologies. And I don't think we're on track. I don't mean to be pessimistic about things, to have the kind of metals mining, the mining part of it, or the refining of those mined metals. I don't think we're on track to really ramp that up in this country. Our source of energy export dominance is certainly on the LNG side. That has been a dramatic change relative to just a decade ago. We do export some oil. We could probably export more oil going forward. Exporting oil can be where the demand side of the equation, it makes sense to care about things like fuel economy improvements and even electric vehicle expansion. I don't believe in forcing electric vehicles. I agree with killing mandates. But on the other hand, I also support how do you export more oil? And you do it by lowering your domestic oil demand and producing more. Both sides of the equation are relevant, and I support those kind of things. We do export technology around the world. Our Silicon Valley companies are the leading technology companies in every country in the world. And of course, again, I've said it before, our capital markets are dominant and are a core part of sort of how we think about our energy export strategic advantage. And again, going forward, being dominant in AI and tech, to me, it is how we should be thinking about energy. What are all the things we need to do on the energy side to ensure we are dominant in artificial intelligence and tech? And it means having a healthy and robust grid that while you have to ensure you can incentivize new power to come on the market, ultimately the prices have to be competitive to ensure we are competitive in all forms of energy, that our transportation fuel costs are competitive, and that our power price costs are competitive. All these things are important towards ensuring AI dominance. And the last country I just want to touch on is India. Their priority, much like China's has been, is to improve living standards, to go from being a poor country to middle income to hopefully someday a rich country. On their strengths from the energy standpoint, they are abundant in coal, and I'm not sure anything else. There's a little bit of oil, but not much. There may be some natural gas, but not that much. I think they have an ability to use new energies like solar and batteries, given it's a hot, strong sun kind of country, et cetera. But I don't think they're anywhere on the new energies value chain, certainly nowhere near where China is. And so their other strength is just that, especially with some of the demographic and other economic challenges China's facing, they're going to be viewed as a core engine of future global GDP growth. And I might equate, in some respects, India to the modern version of Japan after World War II, where Japan was a core driver of GDP growth and therefore became very important to other energy suppliers and countries to interact with. India is obviously, from a people standpoint, many multiples of Japan. But they're both countries that are generally lacking in meaningful domestic energy resources. Again, India does have a lot of coal. And so therefore, I think their relevance becomes from sort of their ability to be a core driver of future GDP growth. I just said this, they don't have much in oil, natural gas, or the new energies value chain that I'm aware of. So what are they going to export from an energy standpoint? I'm not sure anything. Does that mean they won't be geopolitically relevant? I think we're going to get back to point number 2, which is their geopolitical relevance will come from the sheer size of India, their ability to actually probably have much more of a consumer economy than is China. China's been factory of the world. I think India, you're going to see certainly some caring about manufacturing and industrial development, but you're also going to have a consumer economy. You're going to have a technology economy. And I think India can be have healthy economic diversification, something we may not be seeing in China right now. I do think studying and following the Japanese model may be something we need to do when it comes to India in terms of how they think about their energy and economic development. So I'd like to end this video on a personal note, and we are going to do our first ever Parent Corner. Now, yes, I'm a fan of the Bill Simmons podcast, which pioneered Parent Corner as sort of one of his ending segments. Though in that case, he's talking about parenting his children, him and cousin Sal. In my case, we're going to talk about my actual parents. And a couple things here. First, we are really blessed that they are both 85 and they've generally been of sound health, sound mind, sound bodies. I'm 56, so I know I'm lucky in having somewhat brought this up in recent weeks. Not all of you are in the same position in terms of having both parents around or one parent around. So again, we know we are super lucky. And the last year, I'm going to try my best not to overshare here. It's my parents do watch this, at least my dad does. But they're 85, so you're starting to see some of the challenges that typically come with age. And they've lived far away from myself or my sister, for that matter, my brother. And we've been very fortunate that over the last couple months, they have been with us in our home as they transition to a place very nearby where me and my wife now live. And by the way, it's where we all grew up, so it should be home to them. And I think we have had my dad for about 2 months and my mom for about 1 month. And I just want to go through sort of 5 takeaways that have surprised us. And the first one is credit to dad. He is far more capable and far more able to take care of himself than any of us thought was possible. Now, my parents are both hail from India. They got married at 21, came to this country to go to Cornell University, get their advanced degrees and so forth, and have been here more or less ever since. And again, I think me and my siblings would all say, seems like they had a very traditional marriage. Mom sacrificed her career to raise me and my 2 siblings. It always seemed like, dad's in charge, he's the boss. Again, I'm going to keep using the term traditional marriage. Lo and behold, over the last month, my dad can make breakfast, make lunch, cook his own tea, and make his own tea and coffee. And you may say, I will just say it's been a total surprise to us. He makes a real effort to clear his dishes and all these kind of things. And I want to say that has been surprise number 1. I think surprise number 2, and mom's been with us for about 1 month, is kind of the flip side of point number 1, which is we always perceive that, poor mom, dad's in control. What is her saying all this? She's absolutely in charge. They have a much more modern marriage than I think we realized. And mom's ability to drive decision-making has surprised us as well. And dad definitely listens to her in a way that we did not realize till they moved into us. So 2 flip sides of the same argument. Both have surprised us in terms of what I perceived, and I think my siblings perceived as well. The third thing that surprised us is our own children are actually pretty good listeners with the benefit of hindsight. And I guess your parents aren't your children. They still think they're the parents. They still think, they're the ones that can make their own decisions, and I guess they can. And that certainly has been the case. So I'm going to say my kids are now adult kids. They're sort of college or just out of college, so maybe I'm forgetting. But their ability to listen is actually, I'm going to give them credit. They are actually good listeners. And mom and dad, there is room for improvement on the listening function. I think the 4th point I want to make, and it's something I'm going to have to remember, is as you age, do you adjust? And I'll use the baseball analogy. Dwight Gooden used to be a power pitcher. he over time had to learn to become more of a finesse pitcher. I think Andy Pettit somewhat fits that bill as well. As you advance as an athlete, the way you dominated when you were younger doesn't necessarily apply as you get older. I think that's true as you age as a person. And I think it is just something we're all going to have to remember, and maybe just a plea to my parents that adjustments are needed. They're making some adjustments in terms of where they're living, but just how you go about your day-to-day lives. Like, for example, another example, we live in a house where there are lots of staircases. There's no reason when one is 85 to go up and down those staircases 25 times a day. You go up at night, you come down in the morning. There's really very little need to keep going up and down continuously as a source of risk, as an example. So again, will we all adjust as we get older? We shall see, but it is a plea to continue to make adjustments and be thoughtful of it. I think the final point is we could all use a personal trainer or physical therapist. Now, I've been really lucky. It was actually my mom and my wife that as it was either a Christmas or a birthday gift 21 years ago. It's about the time my son was born. Got me a personal trainer. His name is Pete. He's become one of my best friends. I've had him for 21 years, and it has been an absolute blessing in terms of maintaining strength, balance, flexibility, all these kind of things. For sure, as you get older, you need these things. I don't think my parents' generation grew up with personal trainers and PTs as something you do on a regular basis. They definitely need them. I think we're all going to need them. And so I'd say if you don't have one today, whatever your age is, get yourself a personal trainer. Thank you.